Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. You are in for a treat. That's because today you will be learning some key information about payroll tax and more specifically contractors. We hope the session will help you with your work. Now, when you leave here today, you'll probably have more of the bigger picture view of how Revenue WA operates and a clear understanding of payroll tax requirements for contractors. All right, so we respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians, the Whadjuk Noongar people on whose country we are meeting on today, and pay our respects to their elders past and present. We also extend our respect and acknowledgement to all traditional custodians and Aboriginal communities throughout Western Australia and their continuing connection to country, culture and community. We acknowledge and pay tribute to the strength and stewardship of Aboriginal people in sustaining the world's oldest living culture and value the contribution Aboriginal people make to Western Australia's communities and economy. Just another quick disclaimer, these notes have been prepared by Revenue WA as a guide to understanding legislation. The relevant legislation remains the ultimate source of authority on any matter, but as I always say in any of our sessions that we run, please, if you are unsure of anything, please do contact us. It's better to have a question answered than sit on an uncertainty. All right, so here's the agenda for today. We will begin today's session with a quick refresher in general payroll tax matters. Then we will introduce you to the most important reference material available to you, and that is Revenue Ruling PT6. We'll look at different sections of this publication, focusing mainly on the 6 common law tests. These tests need to be considered when determining whether contractor payments are liable to payroll tax or not. We'll then have a go at applying these tests to some scenarios to see if the workers in those examples are employees or contractors for payroll tax purposes. The last item on the agenda today is to look at some audit information. Let's move on to the next slide. So as I said before, I'm just going to review a few basics of payroll tax for you before we get into looking at contractors. While I'm going through this, just imagine your last payroll tax return and see if most of these are familiar to you. The payroll tax annual threshold is currently $1 million. Employers that pay wages between $1 million and $7.5 million are entitled to a deductible amount only on a portion of it. The portion of the threshold that an employer is entitled to depends on what's called the diminishing threshold. What this means is that the closer an employer gets to paying $7.5 million in wages for the year, the less deductible amount they are entitled to. Businesses with payrolls of $7.5 million or more are not eligible for a deductible amount. Your monthly threshold is 1/12 of your annual thresholds, so that is $83,333. The tax rate is 5.5% on annual Australian taxable wages of $1 million and above. Wages include many forms of payments, including salaries, commissions, bonuses, leave, superannuation, salary sacrifice amounts, directors' fees, and more. There are some exempt wages, for example, apprentice wages and certain leave types such as parental leave and Defence Force leave. And for those of you who lodge your payroll tax returns monthly, your monthly returns are due by the 7th of the following month. The exception to this is the June return and annual reconciliation, which is due on the 21st of July. If you want to know more about general payroll tax matters, you can have a look at our payroll tax employer guide, which is on our website. We do run payroll tax overview and wages sessions. And again, that will be on our customer education webpage, which I will show you at the end of today's session as well. Now let's have a look at contractor payments. The term contractor may have a different meaning for payroll tax purposes from what you might expect. Even if you contract someone to work for you and the contract or the written agreement defines them as an independent contractor, they may still be deemed to be your employee. If an employer-employee relationship is deemed to exist, then all payments made to the contractor are taxable except for the GST component. Today we're going to explore the difference between contractors and employees for payroll tax purposes. And just note that payments made to contractors residing and performing their services overseas are not considered wages for payroll tax purposes. Is WA harmonised with other jurisdictions regarding our treatment of contractors? Yes or no? So the answer is, in fact, no. WA is not harmonised with other jurisdictions regarding our treatment of contractors. We treat contractors differently. Okay, so if you do want information about harmonisation provisions for contractors in other jurisdictions, please have a look at the listed publications on the screen, and just note that they don't apply in Western Australia. You can find these publications at the Payroll Tax Australia website, and I will show you what that looks like at the end of today's session as well. All right, going on to legislation. The main legislation informing how Western Australia treats contractors is the Payroll Tax Assessment Act. Section 9AA contains the definition of wages as including any wages, remuneration, salary, commission, bonuses, allowances paid or payable to or in relation to an employee. Section 21 clarifies the relationship between an employee and employer. It outlines how the interposing of a third-party entity, such as a company, partnership, or trust, would not remove the liability for payroll tax because the Commissioner can disregard the interposed entity. The terms employee and contractors are not defined in this Act. That means we need to consider the common law definition of an employee and the legal principles established by case law to make a determination as to when an employee-employer relationship exists. We'll explore these in detail in today's session. All right, so what's the difference between an employee and an independent contractor? To help examine the issue of who is an employee or independent contractor, it is useful to imagine a continuum. On one end, we have an employee who contracts to provide their labour in the service of the employer. And I want you to picture the following scenarios to help you understand what I mean. So if we have to think about a cleaner who works for a cleaning company, cleaning various offices and residences. The cleaning company pays them an hourly rate for their cleaning. The worker provides their labour in the service of the employer. Now, on the other end, we have an independent contractor who works in their own business and in the course of their business contracts to achieve a given outcome for the employer. This relationship is usually characterised by a fee, not a wage, and the contract is finished when work is done. Now think about an independent cleaner who services numerous clients via their own business, specialising in cleaning up after office parties. They are hired by numerous clients on an irregular basis, providing a contract for services. And that's basically the difference between an employee and a contractor. So that's it from me for now. What I'll do is I'm just going to hand over to Sasha, who will talk about the common errors in regard to contractors. She'll then introduce you to the revenue ruling PT6. All right, thanks everyone. Over to you, Sasha.
Thanks, Mary, and good morning, everyone. Okay, so I'd like for you to think about the last time you completed your payroll tax return and see if any of these common errors apply to you. So the common reasons why people misdeclare contractor payments include: if the contractor has an ABN, this does not in itself determine the relationship between the worker and the employer. If the written agreement includes a clause stating words to the effect of, the contractor is an independent contractor and they are not an employee, this is not enough to determine that they are a contractor for payroll tax purposes. If a worker uses an interposed entity, such as a company, trust, or partnership, for payment or engagement with an employer, this alone is not enough to determine that they are an independent contractor. The fact that the contractor is considered bona fide for ATO purposes may not mean that the payments do not need to be included for payroll tax purposes. The personal services income rules of the ATO are not used for payroll tax. The fact that a contractor has more than one job is not conclusive that the contractor does not need to be included for payroll tax, as the arrangement can be similar to that of a casual employee. And finally, the provision of tools or a vehicle for travel alone do not necessarily determine if someone is an employee or a contractor for payroll tax purposes. For contractors, no one factor can be relied upon to make a determination. It depends on the totality of the relationship. An area that can be confusing is employment agents. So, employment agents provide the services of another person, the worker, to a third party, the client, on a contractual basis. Labour hire contracts are when the worker is procured by the employment agency to work in the client's business, but they don't become an employee. In WA, wages paid by employment agents are subject to payroll tax. The agent is deemed to be the employer and as such is liable for payroll tax on the payment made. Payments include allowances, fringe benefits, and superannuation contributions. In this example on the slide, the employment agent supplies the client with a worker and the client pays the recruitment agent a fee of $200. So using this example, who is liable to pay payroll tax? So the answer is the employment agent. From the $200, the employment agent pays the worker $140 and the employment agent is liable for payroll tax and must declare these wages paid to the worker in the payroll tax returns. The employment agent must pay other wages such as super as well. For information about employment agents and chain of on-hire arrangements, please refer to Revenue Ruling PT7. Recruitment agents are different from employment agents. They provide one-off services to their clients by finding a suitable employee where the worker becomes an employee of the client. So under this arrangement, the relationship between the parties need to be identified. If the relationship is determined to be that of an employer and employee, the client is responsible for any payroll tax liability arising from payments made to the worker. If the relationship is determined to be that of a principal and contractor, payments made to the worker are not subject to payroll tax. In either case, the recruitment agency is not liable for payroll tax on wages paid to a worker who has been placed with a client. Revenue Ruling PT 6.1 is used to determine whether an employment relationship exists. This is a publication from which the majority of the information we're covering today is taken. So some important parts of PT 6.1 to note include paragraph 52 on page 6, which lists 5 factors based on case law precedents to assist employers in making a determination regarding contractors they have engaged. Employers should consider these factors when they believe they have engaged independent contractors. Where all these factors exist, then it is likely that the worker will be considered to be an independent contractor. Where all these factors identified in paragraph 52 are not present in an arrangement, it will be necessary for the Commissioner to examine the totality of the relationship before making a determination as to the nature of the relationship. Schedule 1 on page 8 is another important section which provides a list of 8 questions aimed at giving an indication of whether an employer-employee relationship exists. If you answer yes to most of the questions on the list, it is a strong indication that an employer-employee relationship is likely to exist. However, it is the whole working relationship that needs to be reviewed. And please note that these tests apply to payroll tax purposes only and not to determine whether they are entitled for any other employee entitlements, for example, superannuation. Paragraph 4 of the addendum on page 9 provides additional guidance on the characteristics of an employee-employer relationship. It explains in more detail some of the key things that indicate the presence of an employee-employer relationship. In addition to Revenue Ruling PT 6.1, another important aid to help determine what kind of relationship exists is the Contractor Payments Questionnaire. Revenue WA has designed a questionnaire to assist business owners when seeking professional advice about their contractor payments. It is recommended that you answer as many of the questions as possible and give the completed questionnaire to your professional advisor. This questionnaire is also available on our website. Okay, so we're now going to go over a quick example using Schedule 1 on page 8 of Revenue Ruling PT 6.1 to determine whether an employment or contractor relationship exists. If the answer to most of the questions in Schedule 1 is yes, it is likely that the person is an employee, and accordingly, payments made to that person are subject to tax. All right, so here's the scenario. Jack is hired by a fast food chain, Deli Fast Food, to clean 3 of its stores on an ongoing basis. He is instructed to work from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. on Mondays to Fridays and has a weekly cleaning schedule. Jack will receive instructions on the areas to clean from the store managers. Previously, this job was conducted by employees. However, the owner of the stores decided to hire Jack after the employees refused to clean the toilets. Jack is paid an hourly rate for his services, which is paid to his company, Jack's Cleaning Co. On the occasions when Jack is unable to attend work, Deli Fast Food allocates the cleaning work to another worker. Jack does not have the ability to send someone else. So do you think Jack has the characteristics of an employee or an independent contractor for payroll tax purposes? So looking at Schedule 1 on page 8, in this example, Jack is providing services to Deli Fast Food. So is Jack paid on a time basis? Yes, he works for an hourly rate. Interposed entity is disregarded. Is Jack's contract principally for labour? Yes. Does Deli Fast Foods have the authority to control Jack's work? Yes, the store manager gives him instructions. Is Jack prevented from delegating his work to someone else without approval? Yes, someone fills in when he's away. Is Jack engaged on a continuing basis? Yes, it's an ongoing situation. Are Jack's services required by Deli Fast Food in the normal course of their business? Yes, their staff used to do this job in the past. Are Jack's services similar to work carried out by other employees at Deli Fast Food? Yes. Are the work hours defined? Yes, he works 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. Monday to Friday. Therefore, this indicates that Jack is an employee rather than an independent contractor for payroll tax purposes. I'm now going to hand back to Mary to go through the next section on the agenda.
Thanks, Sasha, and hi again, everyone. So we are now going to have a look at the 6 common law tests that are outlined by Revenue Ruling PT6. These tests or factors need to be considered when you determine whether contractor payments are liable for payroll tax or not. Just a note while I remember this, the best way to access Revenue Ruling PT6 further down the track is via the website, and that makes sure that you have the most up-to-date version of the documents. All right, so as I said, there are 6 key indicators that are used to determine what kind of relationship exists, and they include contract versus practical relationship, contracts to achieve a given result, control and direction, independent business, power to delegate, and integration. So you can see that there are page numbers written underneath each of those indicators for easy reference. So these are the factors that we use at Revenue WA to see whether a worker is engaged as an employee or independent contractor. That is when we make a determination on behalf of a client. Some of these factors may suggest that the worker is an employee, while other factors may suggest that the worker is an independent contractor. You might not see all of these factors, however, it is important to evaluate them in the context of the whole relationship, or what we call the totality of the relationship. And you'll hear us repeat this term quite a bit in today's session because it is a really important concept that we need you to take away with you from today's session. All right, so we'll have a look at each of these factors in turn now. To start with, I would like you to focus on page 4 of Revenue Ruling PT6, where we will start with the contract versus practical relationship. So we already talked a bit about this already when Sasha took us through the misconceptions. She mentioned that the terms of a written contract help determine the nature of the relationship between the parties. However, we also learned that the terms of a contract might not be conclusive. So we need to look at the wider facts of the relationship between those involved in the contract. And aspects to consider include the reality of the contract terms. So just ask yourself, is what's written in the contract really agreed to in practice? The evolution of the relationship. So you need to ask, has the relationship evolved over time? The contract may have been written some time ago, so are the terms of the contract the same now? And just because a clause in the contract states that the worker is a contractor or a consultant or engaged to produce an outcome does not mean they are a contractor. And you can have a look at paragraphs 27 to 30 if you would like more information about this aspect. Let's move on to the next key indicator, which is contracts to achieve a given result. The focus here is on the outcome or given result rather than the performance of a contracted task. The factors or aspects we consider here include the required outcome. So was the outcome known at the start? And also the terms of payment. Ask yourself, was the price a fixed fee at the start of the contract, for example, through the competitive tendering or quoting system? Generally, if the contract is for labour only, it's not for a given outcome. And again, you've got some pinpoint references there if you wanted to have a closer look at that. The third key indicator is control and direction. We look at who has the power or right to control or to direct how, where, when, and who is to perform the work. Factors to consider include supervision. Is the worker supervised or do they work independently? Work hours. Does the worker have power over the hours they work? Progress status. Is the worker required to report to the employer on their progress? And also daily task. Does the worker have discretion over the work tasks they perform daily? If the worker needs to be supervised and has set hours to work, plus need to report to their supervisors about their progress and has no discretion over the tasks assigned, it is an indication that the worker is an employee for payroll tax purposes. Whereas if the worker doesn't need to be supervised and can choose their work hours, they are not required to report their progress. What do you think? Well, that's an indication that they could be considered independent contractors. But please remember that we don't just look at control and direction in isolation. This is only one factor of many that needs to be considered when making a determination. And as I said before, we're looking at the totality of the relationship. Okay, some more pinpoint references for you to note there. Okay, the next key indicator is independent business. This one is to see if the worker is running their own business. Now, I want you to imagine yourself as someone who wants to engage the services of an independent contractor to work around your home. Let's say an electrician. So not as an employer, just the services of an independent contractor. If you want a new light fitting installed in your home, think about what would indicate to you that the contractor is conducting their own business. So you can consider factors such as public advertising. Are the workers' services advertised to the general public? Commercial risk. Who gets the profit? Or if there is a loss, who bears it? Liability. Do they bear the liability for poor workmanship or injuries? Income sources. Do they have other sources of income, for example, servicing other clients? And as we mentioned before, please remember that for the purposes of payroll tax liability, it is not relevant that a worker is paid or engaged through their interposed entity. And remembering that could be things like a company, a partnership, or a trust. Okay, the next key indicator to consider is the power to delegate. So what does this mean? The power to delegate means the worker has the authority to engage another person or worker to work on their behalf. The aspects to consider include delegation of tasks. Could the worker delegate work or tasks to another worker of their choosing? Approval to delegate. Before delegating work to another worker, do they have to seek approval? So again, if the worker cannot delegate their work to someone else, it is an indication that the worker is an employee for payroll tax purposes. However, if the worker does have the authority to engage someone else to do their work and does not need prior approval, This indicates that they are an independent contractor. And again, the power to delegate is only one factor. The last indicator to consider is how integral the worker's services are to the business. A worker's services are integral to the business when the work performed forms part of the core business of the employer. This could be indicated by working as part of a team, for example. Usually, if the services provided by a worker are integral to the business, then they would be considered to be an employee for payroll tax purposes. I'll give you a couple of examples to see if you understand the term integration. So here's the example. It's about a firm that sells air conditioning units. The firm has a number of salaried employees who are salespeople and also has several commission-based salespeople. The commission-based salespeople do work that is almost identical to the work of the employed salespeople. Would they be considered integral? Yes, these people, the commission-based salespeople, are considered to be integral because of the nature of their work here. So I've got another question here for you, and this one is about an interior decorator this time, who is hired to redecorate a bank. Would the interior decorator be considered as integral to the business? The answer to this is no, they are not integral, as interior decoration is not a core function of the bank. Let me just move this slide here. Now, just to note that non-integration alone does not determine that someone is a contractor. All right, so just to recap, these are the 6 key indicators established by the courts to assist us in determining whether a worker is an employee or contractor. And as I mentioned earlier, it is important to note that there is no single test that can be relied on when making a determination. You do need to consider all of the aspects before making a decision. And in other words, you need to look at the totality of the relationship. So if you are still uncertain about the contractor payments after reading Revenue Ruling 6, we do encourage you to seek professional advice, or you can also contact Revenue WA via our web inquiry form to obtain a determination. That's all good. All right, we're now going to go through some scenarios to help you better understand how these key indicators can assist you with determining whether someone is a contractor or employee in different contexts. Just note that these examples are made up ones, so if you do know of any similar businesses, it is completely coincidental and unintentional. We've got Revenue Ruling PT6. We'll be using that for this session. So if we have a look at the matrix now, in each of the boxes relating to the 6 tests, you just tick whether you think the people in the scenario are an employee or an independent contractor, and just note your reasons why. All right, so for the first case study, I'm just going to read out the agreement between Penguin Transport and Stefan, and then we'll have a chance to decide if Stefan is an employee or a contractor for payroll tax purposes. So we've got Penguin Freight, who operates a road freight business in Maddington. It has approximately 40 employees, of which 20 to 25 are truck drivers. Penguin operates a fleet of 30 trucks and delivers freight throughout Western Australia. As Christmas approaches, Penguin always experiences a spike in freight activity. This level of freight activity usually does not continue after the Christmas period, so Penguin Freight needs to engage somebody on a short-term basis until the freight activity dies down. Penguin engages Stefan as a contract driver. In an undocumented engagement, they have selected him through word of mouth and agreed to pay him $40 per hour, but will not provide superannuation or leave entitlements. Stefan is to report to Penguin Freight on a daily basis and will be supervised by management. Stefan will work similar hours to those of the employee truck drivers and will need to log his working hours on a daily basis. He will invoice on a weekly basis for the hours worked, and management will be able to check this off against the hours logged. Stefan does not have the right to refuse a reasonable task that is allocated to him and could face the prospect of instant dismissal if he does so. He is required to personally provide his services to Penguin Freight. He cannot delegate his responsibility to another party. Either party could terminate the arrangement without notice since there is no written agreement. Penguin Freight will control the location, sequence, and priority of tasks performed by Stefan. Stefan provides his services as a sole trader, but everything Stefan requires to provide his services will be supplied by Penguin Freight, such as his materials, equipment, truck, phone, and radio. Stefan will be covered under the insurance policies held by Penguin Freight for workers' compensation and public liability. So those are the facts of the scenario. For payroll tax purposes, is Stefan an employee of Penguin Freight or an independent contractor? Now, before I give you the answer, let's go through the matrix so you can see how to apply revenue ruling PT6 using the table there. So for the first section, contract versus practical relationship, there is no written agreement. So we would look at the practical relationship to determine what the agreement between the parties is. Using the information given to us, we would say that the nature of the practical relationship is that of an employee-employer. So we put a tick under E. For the section of contracts to achieve a given result, we would say Stefan's contract is principally for labour and he's paid an hourly rate, which indicates he is an employee. When it comes to the control and direction section for this scenario, Stefan is required to report to and is supervised by Penguin. He works similar hours to other workers. He also invoices weekly for hours worked, and Penguin checks this against the hours he's logged. Stefan does not have the right to refuse a reasonable task, and Penguin controls the location, sequence, and priority of his tasks. And again, this indicates he is an employee, so we put a tick under E for that section. When we look at the next section, independent business, he has some aspects of both an employee and a contractor. So the contractor aspect of it is that Penguin don't pay him super or leave entitlements. So we put a tick under C for that aspect. And the employee aspect is that Penguin supplies all of his materials. He is covered by Penguin's workers' compensation and public liability, and Stefan works solely for Penguin. So this indicates that he is an employee in this section. Now for the next section, that's power to delegate. Stefan does not have the power to delegate his responsibility to another party, and therefore this indicates he is an employee. And lastly, integration. Stefan is performing a core function of the business, and he works similar hours to other workers. So again, this indicates that he is an employee. So in this scenario, an employee-employer relationship exists. Stefan has attributes of an employee when we consider all the factors and the totality of the relationship, and therefore all the payments made to Stefan need to be declared for payroll tax. Let's see what happens in a similar scenario with slightly different details. So that is activity 1B, which is about Penguin, Transport and Bob. So in the busy period leading up to Christmas, Penguin are looking for a short-term contractor to assist with the work. However, Penguin do not have any fleet trucks available for the contractor to use. Therefore, they require someone who can provide their own truck. Penguin engages Bob from Bob's Transport Services. The circumstances of this engagement are very similar to their engagement with Stefan, but Bob is providing his own truck and insurances. He's therefore paid a higher hourly rate of $50 per hour for his services. Bob has existing customers that he will need to service periodically during the run-up to Christmas. As part of this arrangement, Penguin and Bob have agreed that Bob can service these clients when he needs to. So the question that I'm going to ask is, do these factors indicate that Bob is an employee or contractor for payroll tax purposes? The answer is that the arrangement would indicate an independent contractor relationship, as Bob supplies his own truck, inclusive of insurances and running costs. He bears the economic risks in keeping with a proper business. If the truck breaks down, he cannot earn income, and he will need to repair the truck at his own costs. And Penguin will be forced to engage another contractor to perform the services. Penguin Transport in this instance is essentially engaging the truck, not necessarily Bob as the driver. Let's add an additional element to the scenario and see what happens. With the busy period continuing, Penguin are seeking to engage another short-term contractor to assist with the spike in freight activity. After negotiations with Bob's Transport, Penguin engaged Adrian, a contractor from Bob's Transport, to assist with the work. Adrian will assist Penguin with the loading and unloading of goods onto its trucks. Penguin and Bob's Transport have negotiated a $200 per day fee that Penguin will pay to Bob's Transport for the worker, Adrian. Penguin does not pay Adrian any payments directly. They pay Bob's Transport the $200 fee. Adrian issues Bob's Transport invoices, and Bob's Transport pay Adrian $140 per day for his services at Penguin. Adrian is not an employee of Bob's Transport or Penguin. So what kind of relationship does this arrangement indicate? This arrangement would indicate that Bob's Transport functions as an employment agent and procures Adrian as the worker for Penguin Transport, who is the client. Let me just pop that up there for you. Bob's Transport, as the employment agent, is liable for payroll tax on the $140 daily payments made to the worker, Adrian. Now, for the next scenario, I'm just going to read out details of the agreement between Andrew's Animal Store and Stephanie's Secretarial Services. Then we'll have a chance to decide if Stephanie is an employee or a contractor for payroll tax purposes. So Andrew's Animal Store operates 3 pet stores in the Perth metropolitan area. It has approximately 30 employees across the stores. None of the employees are bookkeepers or perform secretarial services. To keep on top of their day-to-day accounting tasks, they engage Stephanie from Stephanie's Secretarial Services. Stephanie's secretarial business is in its initial startup period, and Andrew's Animal Store is her only client. The amount of work required for the 3 pet stores operations keeps Stephanie busy, an average of 30 hours per week for 5 days per week. This can vary depending on tasks she is directed to complete from week to week. So contract versus practical relationship. We're just going to go through the different factors. With that aspect, Stephanie is engaged via a signed and dated client agreement. The client agreement is between Andrew's Animal Stores and Stephanie's Secretarial, which outlines the scope of works. And as per the agreement, Stephanie is to perform bookkeeping services, business activity statement services, end-of-year tax preparation, payroll, managing the day-to-day financial transactions, bookkeeping, knowledge sharing to admin employees when required as well. Both Stephanie and Andrew's Animal Stores could cease the arrangement at any time. The client agreement did not have any clauses relating to the cessation of services. And with contracts to achieve a given result, Stephanie is mainly engaged for labour only at an agreed rate of $85 per hour, excluding GST. She will invoice on a weekly basis for the hours worked. She is not engaged for a given result and did not quote for the job. With control and direction, Stephanie was engaged via word of mouth as a friend of Andrew's knew she was starting a secretarial business and recommended her. Stephanie was not required to work set days or times and did not complete a timesheet. The client agreement did not set out any required work days or times. Stephanie found that she had to work 5 days a week and spent most of this time working from the head office of Andrew's Animal Stores. Andrew supervised Stephanie to the extent that they had weekly meetings to ensure the tasks were completed in a timely manner and they could discuss any emerging issues. Stephanie carried out her tasks based on her expertise in the secretarial industry. If Stephanie could not perform her services on a particular day or week, she was required to advise Andrew. And Stephanie did not have the discretion to reallocate her work to another person. Stephanie would catch up on the work when she returned to work. With independent business, Stephanie was free to be engaged by other businesses and there were no restrictions placed on her. However, being a new startup business, Stephanie did not have any other clients and the workload from the 3 stores meant that she did not have time to work for other clients. Stephanie provided her own laptop to undertake the work. Stephanie was covered under Andrews Animal Stores Workers' Compensation Insurance. Stephanie was not paid any leave entitlements. Andrews Animal Stores did not pay Stephanie's superannuation as they were advised to do so by their external accountant, and Stephanie was required to rectify any errors in her own time and at her own expense. So I am going to ask a question. The question is, for payroll tax purposes, is Stephanie an employee of Andrews Animal Stores or an independent contractor? Let's see what the matrix will look like to see if we can make a clear determination. So for the first section, contract versus practical relationship, as the written agreement comprehensively sets out the terms, the legal rights and obligations of the arrangement, we'll look at this to determine the arrangement between the parties. This indicates that the nature of the parties is that of an employee-employer. For the section of contracts to achieve a given result, we would say Stephanie is engaged for ongoing secretarial services without being required to achieve a given result. She is principally engaged for labour-only services and paid hourly rates with no defined end goal. This indicates she is an employee. When we review the control and direction section of this scenario, Andrew supervises Stephanie and she is required to attend weekly progress meetings with him. She works 5 days a week, similar to other employees. This again indicates she is an employee. When we look at the next section, independent business, Stephanie has aspects of both an employee and a contractor. The contractor aspects are that Andrews Animal Stores does not pay her any leave entitlements and Stephanie sets her working days and hours to suit her availability. Stephanie also provides her own laptop. The employee aspects are that while Stephanie sets her working days and hours to suit her availability, she works 5 days a week from the head office of Andrews Animal Stores. She is covered by Andrews Animal Stores Workers' Compensation Policy and works solely for Andrews Animal Stores. When we look at the next section, power to delegate, although it is not specified whether Stephanie has the power to delegate in the agreement, she did not engage other workers and she personally performed the services. This indicates that she is an employee. And lastly, integration. Stephanie is performing a role not similar to any employees of Andrews Animal Stores. She has, however, been integrated into the business, working 5 days a week alongside the employees at the head office. This indicates that she is an employee. So looking at the matrix there, the totality of the relationship, overall, it is clear that Stephanie has more attributes of an employee when we consider the 6 factors. Therefore, the payments made to Stephanie less the GST are considered to be taxable and assessable for payroll tax purposes. So, scenario 2B, what if Stephanie takes on another client? 2 months into providing services for Andrews Animal Stores, Stephanie takes on another client, Michelle's Moggy Store, 5 hours a week. There is no agreement in place. In Stephanie's role for Michelle's Moggy Store, she works alongside the employees and takes direction from the manager of the business. Stephanie is paid an hourly rate and superannuation is not paid. Stephanie continues to work the 30 hours per week for Andrews Animal Stores and 5 hours a week at Michelle's Moggy Store. Stephanie continues to provide her own laptop. Although Stephanie now has 2 clients, she continues to provide a labour-only arrangement at hourly rates from the business premise of the clients. Stephanie does not incur any expenses while undertaking the services for the new client. The arrangement for both Andrews Animal Stores and Michelle's Moggy Store is essentially part-time employee positions, and therefore this still indicates that she is an employee. So let's change another element of this scenario and see what happens. 6 months into the arrangement, and Andrew's animal stores are suffering from a significant drop in sales. Andrew makes the tough decision to close 2 of his stores and just keep his flagship store operating to try and stem the flow. This results in a reduction in work for Stephanie and variations to existing agreement, specifically delegation. She hires a casual employee and delegates tasks to them. Under this arrangement, Stephanie finds that she can get the bookkeeping tasks for Andrew's animal store done in 15 hours per week. Stephanie also continues to work 5 hours a week for Michelle's Moggy store. Stephanie has had interest from several other businesses, and with the additional time she has available and her ability to delegate, she takes on new casual staff and 4 or 5 new clients to which she provides secretarial services. In addition, she now has a home office set up so that she can provide her services remotely and does not physically have to go to any of the business premises of her clients. She provides her own insurances and works any days to suit her business availability. Stephanie is not directed in her tasks, and she has now transitioned to a more independent business structure. For payroll tax purposes, do these changes indicate that Stephanie is now an employee or a contractor for Andrew's animal store? So these changes in circumstances indicate more of an independent contractor relationship, as Stephanie is no longer supervised or controlled and is not working alongside employees and managers. She's incurring all of the business financial costs, working remotely from her own office, and she has multiple clients that she is providing her services simultaneously for. What we are showing you with this example is that the nature of a relationship can change as various elements of the practical relationship change over time. All right, so that's it from me for now. I'm just going to hand over to Sasha, and she will take you through to the next part of the session. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Mary. So let's have a look at the last scenario now. So Testing Proprietary Limited carries out soil testing and sampling for various types of agricultural businesses in WA. Soil sampling and testing is either carried out at the client's place of business or at Testing's lab in Northam, depending on the client's needs. Part of Testing's core practice is to ensure that the process of sampling and testing soil is quality assured and controlled. Testing has 25 employees, who they include for payroll tax purposes. They only have one contractor, Bradley Pritt, who is not included in their payroll tax return. Bradley Pritt was the previous owner of Testing. After the sale of the business, Bradley was primarily engaged to continue his role of providing quality assurance and control services as a contractor, along with establishing any relevant procedures. Bradley does not have to be supervised to complete his work, and he is the only worker there who can provide these services. Initially, Bradley invoices for his services monthly, but as the time goes by, Bradley agrees with Testing to come on board as a full-timer. Bradley can choose his own work hours as long as they add up to full-time hours over the week. Testing provides Bradley with all the necessary equipment to carry out his work. If Bradley's work is not up to standard, Testing can terminate his services and employ someone else to do the work in his place. So what sort of relationship do you think Testing has with Bradley? So this time it's not so easy to make a determination. So let's use our determination matrix to see why. For the first section, he has attributes of both. So he started as a contractor, and it's clear his relationship with Testing has evolved and is now an employee. For the contracts to achieve a given result section, Bradley originally invoiced monthly but later received a wage. He provided his services in an ongoing manner and provided labour only, so this indicates that he is an employee. Bradley does not have to be supervised to complete his work, which indicates that he is a contractor. Even though Bradley can choose his hours, he has to make up full-time hours each week, and he can be replaced if his work is not up to the standard. So under the control and direction section, we see again that Bradley has attributes of an employee as well as a contractor. For the independent business section, Bradley works full-time. He does not provide services to the other businesses. Testing provides Bradley with the necessary equipment, and Bradley is paid a full-time wage. So this indicates that he is an employee. Bradley is required to provide his services personally, and he is not able to delegate his services to someone else. As Bradley cannot get someone else to do his work, he does not supervise other staff. Testing has the power to hire and fire Bradley. So under power to delegate, he is likely an employee. Lastly, for the integration section, again there are attributes of both employee and contractor. No other worker there provides similar services to Bradley. So this is the contractor attribute. And part of testing's core business is to ensure that the process used to do the sampling and testing is quality assured and controlled, which means the services provided by Bradley are integral to their business. Although Bradley has characteristics of both, when we look at the totality of the relationship, we can see that he is more an employee rather than a contractor. Therefore, payments made to him need to be declared for payroll tax. I know this was a bit more of a trickier one, but I hope these scenarios help you to better understand how we look at the totality of the relationship between the two parties. Now, in the final part of this session, we're going to have a quick look at the compliance and audit process. I'm first going to take you through the compliance process. So this is when Revenue WA makes a determination during an audit, that is to see if a worker is an employee or a contractor. Generally, an officer would conduct an interview with management or senior staff, and sometimes it will be necessary to also interview supervisors and individual contractors. That is, if there is insufficient information to make a determination. So step 1 is identify. So have general discussions with accountants, bookkeepers, and as I mentioned before, sometimes with the workers to understand the types of services they provide. Check profit and loss, written agreements, and worker-contractor invoices. Check if the ABN is valid and that they are registered for GST. Check that the internet for business advertisements or websites. And check suppliers and creditors listing. Step 2 is classify. So establish the frequency, how regular services are being provided, for example, 3-month blocks, once a year for 1 day, etc. The value of the remuneration paid to the person while providing the services. Types of services provided, skilled or unskilled, and if it may classify into industries if there are a number of groups. Step 3 is eliminate. So we'll categorize the contractors into different groups, yes, no, or maybe. So if it is a yes, they are contractors and those payments aren't liable for payroll tax. If no, they may be deemed employees, so those payments are liable for payroll tax excluding the GST. And there may be some payments that need further investigation. That is when the contractor's questionnaire is used and there may be further interviews before they make a determination. Step 4 is determination. So to make a determination, the Revenue WA officer will review overall the following: the contractor questionnaire results, they'll look at the key characteristics of the employment relationship and conditions, interview outcomes, employment acceptance letter, that is the contract or employment conditions, and they'll assess all of the above. The officer will then let the employer know the outcome of the audit. Standard penalties do apply if contractors are deemed employees and their payments are not declared. Please refer to Commissioner's Practices TAA 18.3 and TAA 19.2 for more information regarding penalties. That's it from me now. I'm going to hand back to Mary to take you through the rest of the webinar.
Thanks, Sasha. All right, so now that we have gone through all of the items on the agenda, let's just have a little bit of a quiz. There are 2 questions. So the first question is a clause in written agreement that the worker is a contractor and not an employee conclusive. So it's simple yes or no answer. And this really goes back to the beginning of our session. For this question, the answer is no. The fact that a clause is in writing, that the worker is a contractor and non-employed, that is not conclusive in itself. You again need to look at the nature of the relationship. Okay. And then we've got this last quiz question for you. This is a true or false question. So I have a statement there and it says, I have an ABN, trade under a business name, and supply an invoice to request my payment. That automatically makes me an independent contractor. My employer does not pay payroll tax on my labour charge. Is this true or false? So the answer to this one is false. It does depend on the totality of the relationship. And again, both these relate to what we explained earlier when Sasha took us through the common mistakes. And just remember, don't just look at one factor. We need to look at the whole relationship. So that phrase again, the totality of the relationship, before you make a determination. So that's it in terms of the content that we'll be covering for today's session. So we began today's session with just a quick overview in payroll tax in general. Then we had a look at the 6 common law tests and introduced you to revenue ruling PT6. We applied the tests to various scenarios so that you could see how it worked in action. And with focus being whether or not the employees in those examples were employees or contractors for payroll tax purposes. And the last bit of information that Sasha took you through was audit information. So having now gone through all of the topics on the slide there, I'm just going to take you through some of the resources that we mentioned throughout today's session. So let me bring this website across for you. This is the wa.gov.au website, which is the webpage that you would go to if you wanted to find out anything about payroll tax or about any of the other revenue lines here. Now, on the page, you can see that there is a search engine here, and it is very much like the Google search engine where you type in your key terms and the search box will come up with the top 9 or so suggestions related to your key terms. So we did mention a few of the payroll tax forms and publications, and you can see here that one of the suggestions is in fact find payroll tax forms and publications. So I will click on that. And you can see that there is a dedicated page for these documents here. If I scroll down a bit, you can see that the page is divided into the main content section, and on the right hand side you have got some links as well that you can click on. But looking at here, we've got the forms here, and the one that is really relevant for today's session is the contractor payments questionnaire. So this was a form that you would fill out to find out whether or not a person that has been engaged for a business is likely to be a contractor or an employee. So put in as much detail as you can in that questionnaire, and you can submit it to your tax professional, or you can also submit it to us to help you come to a decision there. I'll scroll down here to the Commissioner's practices. So a Commissioner practice is really a document that explains how the Commissioner will use his discretion when dealing with the practical aspects of the assessment of tax. So if we scroll down here, you can see that we've got the administrative practices here. Have a look at those in your own time if you are interested in any of those topics there. And with revenue rulings, this is more relevant to today's session here. Revenue ruling PT6, which you can see is here, and PT7 as well. So please, when you are looking at the documents, go to the website and download it directly from here to make sure that you have the most up-to-date version of the documents. Okay, and then we've got some other topics that are covered by the revenue rulings. and you might want to look at those as well if you are dealing with other aspects of payroll tax there. So on this right-hand side, this is the side contents bar. So the links that appear at any point in time will change depending on what you have on the main part of the page here. So for this one, we can see the payroll tax employer guide, which I do want to show you briefly. And this is the document that is pretty much the encyclopedia for payroll tax. You can see that we've got the chapters here, and I will show you the wages checklist as well. So if you click on that, that's pretty much a summary of the different kinds of wages and how they are treated for payroll tax purposes there. But there are also the other topics there as well, which does include the contractors topic in there. Now, if we scroll down here, we've got the contact section of the page here. If you have a question or you do need to contact us, please use the phone number on the screen there. Or if you have that question that is very specific, you can submit a web inquiry by clicking on Contact Us Online. I'll show you what it looks like here, and it's pretty much follow the prompts type of form here. You can attach documents as well, and then you can submit your web inquiry here. So this is for the specific questions that you have relating to contractors. I'm just going to go back a bit now and just scroll up here. All right, so what you might notice as well is at the top right of the wa.gov.au webpage is another search box that will also be on any page that you land on. Just note that this one does not contain the search suggestions that you would normally get on the home page. So I do want to show you the Revenue WA Customer Education page, which you might already be familiar with. Let's click on that link there. So if you signed yourself up for this webinar, then you would have landed on this page already. If someone else signed you up, then you might not know, be aware of this page here. So this page contains all of the webinars that we are running. We generally advertise them 1 to 2 months in advance so that you can put them in your calendar. So we've got the overview, the tax and exempt wages coming up as well. And we've got another contractors one coming up. So if you find one that suits your schedule, feel free to register for them. If you do find that nothing works for your schedule, then that's okay, because you can register your interest by clicking on this link here. That's just an EOI that lets us know that you are interested in attending future sessions later down the track, and we will email you as we schedule more sessions, okay? And hopefully some of those ones that we schedule will fit your time. Okay, so those are the webinars here. If I scroll up, we've also got our e-newsletter, which I would recommend that you subscribe to if you would like to stay up to date with any of the publications that have been updated. And they also list any legislative updates as well, and they advertise our customer education sessions. So these e-newsletters come out every 2 months. And if you want to receive them automatically, subscription is the way to go. Otherwise, you can just click on that link there and it will take you directly to the e-newsletters there. We've also got our Department of Treasury and Finance YouTube videos, which you can access via the link on this sidebar here, or you can click on the link in that header text over here. You can also do a Google search for the Department of Treasury and Finance WA. Make sure you put WA in there as well, just to make sure that you do end up with the right government department. And it will take you through to this home page here. which is our YouTube channel. And the best way to navigate this channel is just to click on the playlists here, which organizes the videos into their topics here. So with payroll tax here, we've got a dedicated category here. You click on view full playlist and you can see that we've got a few webinars up here that you can have a look at, the recorded ones. We've also got a few content related videos if you wanted to find out more, and you can see that we've got one that's focused specifically on contractors as well. So have a look at that if you are interested in that. Now, if you are interested in the Revenue Online videos, the systems-based videos, then we do have a playlist dedicated to that. Let me just see if I can find that for you. Online payroll tax here. So this is what you would look at if you were wondering, oh, how do I log into Revenue Online, for example? So very, very short and sharp videos if you ever get stuck on how to use the system itself. All right, so last one I want to show you is the Payroll Tax Australia website. So this is the website that shows you how the other jurisdictions are treating particular aspects of payroll tax here. So you can have a look at the revenue rulings here, and it takes you to a table with all the various revenue rulings and how they are applied or not in the particular jurisdictions. And as we said before, WA is not harmonised in terms of contractors here. So this is more for those of you who are either interstate employers or who might be interstate employers, or who are just interested in what the other states and territories are doing there. And that's it in terms of the resources that I would like to show you now. So I'm going to end the webinar now for everyone. All right, thanks very much, everyone. Hope to see you again soon.